April 16, 2025, came close to changing the path of African history forever. A hidden but dangerous plot was underway, one that aimed to take out President Ibrahim Traoré and throw Burkina Faso into chaos. It wasn't just outside enemies at work. The danger came from within, a mix of terrorist groups and traitors working together to strike both the army and the general public. This plan almost succeeded until something unexpected happened. Inside the Burkinabe military, some loyal soldiers refused to turn on their country. They exposed the plot, but that didn't mean the danger was over. Here's where things get more disturbing. Who was really behind the attempted coup? The man believed to be in charge didn't go into hiding. Instead, he ran to a neighboring African country and wasn't punished, but protected. Why would Ivory Coast shield someone who tried to destroy Burkina Faso? Is this just politics? Or is there something more sinister happening behind the scenes? And who was this so-called mastermind? Not a rebel, not a foreign agent. Shockingly, it was Barry Abdurrahmane, a senior officer from within President Traoré's own military team. So, what's really going on in West Africa? Let's break it down. Barry was someone trusted with national security, someone who had access to top-secret military information. But instead of guarding that knowledge, he gave it to terrorist leaders fully aware of the damage it would cause. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a clear, intentional act of betrayal. He did it knowing that innocent lives would be lost. Why? Was it about gaining power, revenge, or money? Barry broke trust in many ways. He deceived every Burkinabe citizen who dreams of peace, unity, and a stable future free from foreign-backed unrest. Betrayals like this don't just harm governments. They tear nations apart from the inside. And Barry wasn't acting alone. He used his position to convince others to join his cause. Fellow officers who once promised to defend the country were tempted with offers of wealth, promotions, and power, if only they helped remove Traoré from power. To make things worse, Barry also reached out to the VDM militia group. He didn't just bribe them, he manipulated their anger, encouraging them to turn against their own nation. This wasn't just a military coup attempt. It was psychological warfare. Barry was playing a clever, dangerous game while others underestimated him. Then, suddenly, he disappeared. Just like that. For weeks, no one knew where he'd gone. Until Burkina Faso's intelligence services uncovered something truly chilling. Barry managed to escape to Ivory Coast. According to intelligence reports, a new plan to assassinate President Traoré and throw Burkina Faso into complete disorder is already in motion, and it's being coordinated from Abidjan, the capital of Ivory Coast. This time, the deadline is clear. Launch the attack before June 2025. This goes beyond betrayal. It's a hidden war, and time is running out. The April 16th plot didn't succeed, but instead of giving up, the conspirators just pushed the date forward. Now, the new target is sometime before June. The threat isn't just concerning, it's potentially devastating. For years, people have blamed Western countries for the unrest in Africa. But what happens when your own people are the ones working to destroy your country from the inside? These Burkinabe traitors have turned their backs on everything the nation stands for: peace, order, progress. They ignore the positive changes Traoré has brought, the efforts to rebuild, the pride and hope returning to the people. Why would any African side with outsiders to tear down what we're finally beginning to create for ourselves? But what's worse, and more painful, is who's helping them. Ivory Coast. A neighboring country we've long seen as a brother has decided to shelter those trying to break our nation. Think about that. Instead of cooperating with Burkina Faso to arrest these criminals, the Ivorian government has welcomed them. No public condemnation, no official response, just silence, and that silence says a lot, but it goes even deeper. These enemies aren't just hiding in Ivory Coast, they've been offered protection. A safe space to continue plotting and destabilizing peace in the region. Let's be honest here. Anyone paying attention can connect the dots. The president of Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara, isn't acting independently. He's part of a bigger system, one that has long interfered in African affairs. France. Ouattara didn't just rise to power on his own. Remember, France fully supported his takeover in 2011. Since then, he has consistently put French interests before the unity and independence of Africa. So, what's happening now isn't just politics, it's calculated, it's strategic, and it's dangerous. We still don't know how Burkina Faso will respond. But the bigger question is, how will Africa handle these internal betrayals? Let's dig deeper. Ouattara's story isn't just about current events. It's about long-term planning and foreign manipulation that started decades ago. Back in 1968, when Ouattara was just 26, France stepped in and secured him a role at the International Monetary Fund. That moment marked the start of a well-thought-out path. With France guiding the way, his climb was no coincidence. He quickly rose through the ranks, and in 1973, he was sent to work with the Central Bank of West African States, conveniently stationed in Paris. 2 years later, another promotion came. By 1983, he was named deputy governor of the same bank, thanks again to French backing. Bit by bit, the pieces of the puzzle were put together. A puppet built over time. From this point on, the game gets dirtier. While Ouattara was being prepared for leadership, France was in the background wrecking the economy of Ivory Coast. Yes, the same country they claimed to be helping. Policies were distorted, growth was stifled, and the economy began to slowly collapse. It was not an accident. It was well-timed sabotage. Because when Ivory Coast was in serious circumstances and drowning in economic ruin, France gave its answer. Here comes Ouattara, the man they had been developing for years and had positioned in all the big banks. He was now presented as Ivory Coast's savior and the guy who could save it. But the purpose was never to defend the country. It is related to control. And that's exactly how France affected Ivorian leadership. Rather than using tanks or coups, they employed economics, manipulation, and a man by the name of Alassane Ouattara. As Ivory Coast's economy continued to collapse, France refused to give up. It got more intense. It also shifted its stance on Alassane Ouattara. With France's full support, Ouattara returned to the International Monetary Fund, this time as both an economist and the director of the African department. At the same time, he was named an advisor to the IMF's managing director. He was being positioned on the international scene with a twofold purpose meant to raise his profile. 4 years later, albeit not as a regular officer, he rejoined the Central Bank of West African States. He returned as governor of the bank. The position was conveniently placed in France, of course. At that time, Ivory Coast's economy was barely surviving. The damage was already done. The time was right for France at last. The trap had been set by someone. France had no choice but to put a puppet in the Ivorian government. They excelled at that. Manipulation that occurs behind closed doors. In 1990, they succeeded in convincing President Houphouët-Boigny, the country's elderly father, to choose Ouattara as head of the country's Economic Stabilization Initiative. They portrayed him as the economic savior and the man who could fix all issues. However, there was nothing that needed to be repaired. Presenting Ouattara as a national hero and establishing legitimacy were the goals. There was another factor that France was depending on: time. The president, Houphouët-Boigny, was near death. He had undergone surgery for prostate cancer in France. His declining health was likewise known to the French government. They knew there was not much time left. As a result, they moved rapidly. Behind the scenes, pressure increased. By the end of 1990, France had won. President Houphouët-Boigny was forced to appoint Alassane Ouattara as Prime Minister of Ivory Coast, despite his weakness, illness, and lack of defense. It was a wise decision. And now France had a guy with economic and political clout. A cheerful puppet in a suit, prepared to work for Paris rather than Abidjan. By then, the French had done it. They had achieved their long-term objective. They had successfully positioned their guy, their puppet, in one of the most powerful positions in Ivory Coast. Under Prime Minister Alassane Ouattara, everything was now coming together. The last thing to do was to ensure total allegiance. France has a strategy for that as well. In 1991, France offered Ouattara more than just political support in return for his compliance and utility. They gave him something far more symbolic: a spouse. That year, Ouattara married a French woman with close ties to France's aristocracy, Dominique Claudine Nouveillon. This was not only a romantic relationship, it was a political seal, a legally binding contract. The world was informed that Ouattara's future was now inexorably connected to France's. But not many people know about this portion. This union was more than just a happy event. It was accepted. Not even the former president of France was against it. In reality, Neuilly-sur-Seine's mayor at the time, Nicolas Sarkozy, officiated the wedding. Yes, the Sarkozy who would later become president of France. So what kind of African leader needs the okay of the French presidency to marry? It was not merely a wedding, it was officially acknowledged that Ouattara was France's guy in West Africa, both at work and in life. For Sarkozy to perform Ouattara's wedding was more than just a formality. It served as a preview of what was to come. Because Sarkozy would play a key role in making sure Ouattara would serve France and go on to become president of Côte d'Ivoire years later. But that power grab didn't happen overnight. France had a strategy, and they adhered to it. The next goal was clear once Ouattara had taken control of the prime minister's position: the White House. What then did France do? They began to change the political landscape to accommodate him. One by one, every person who would have threatened Ouattara and who did not back France was purposefully discredited or killed. Whether they were inside the administration or not didn't matter. If France believed you were a danger to their puppet's rise, you were dealt with. The country then held its first multi-party elections in 1990. A pivotal moment, a chance for democracy to take root. However, what replaced it? The first thing Ouattara did as prime minister was to jail Laurent Gbagbo, the only real opposition candidate, and his wife, Simone Avey. Law and order have nothing to do with it. To eliminate competition was the aim. Making sure the Ivorian people could never choose a leader who was not approved by France was the aim. Because Ouattara's true function as prime minister was never to serve the Ivorian people. Its objective was to protect France's economic, political, and strategic interests. He was not just the head of a government. He was executing a foreign scheme. Paris, too, was pulling the strings. After President Houphouët-Boigny's death, Côte d'Ivoire was in a state of chaos. And in the midst of the chaos, Alassane Ouattara took the lead. Against the wishes of the deceased president, who had personally chosen Henri Konan Bédié as his rightful heir, Ouattara made an attempt to assume the presidency. He didn't wait. He didn't consult anyone. All he did was call himself the heir. France, of course, was immediately behind him, ready to give their puppet their wholehearted support. But the Ivorian people? They were behind Bédié, because they didn't think of Ouattara as belonging to them. They thought he was alien, both politically and culturally. Given his strong ties to France, the old colonial master, many Ivorians doubted his loyalty. Was he truly Ivorian-looking, or just the French instrument? Thankfully, the people's voice prevailed. When Bédié took over as interim president in 1993, he seriously harmed France's goals and Ouattara's ambitions. But France was far from done. They pulled Ouattara back into the global spotlight for a new beginning. In 1994, he was appointed as one of the 3 deputy managing directors of the IMF. Indeed, a position of prestige, but more importantly, one of power and strategy. France knew they would call him again when the moment was right. And they did. In 1999, Ouattara was forced by France to rejoin Ivorian politics. One problem, though, was a secret that was discreetly hidden in official reports. Ouattara is not entirely Ivorian. Burkina Faso is where he was born. And this information affected everything, even though it might not seem significant at first. It invalidated him from the 1995 presidential election, and Bédié again declared victory. But here's the twist. Perhaps a current incident could be explained by that Burkinabe genesis, Ouattara's interference in Burkina Faso's internal affairs. Out of strategy, not out of fraternity, on behalf of France. And trust me, we will go deeper into that connection soon. Just as it seemed like the dust was starting to settle, everything changed again. Before the 2000 elections could even take place, President Henri Konan Bédié, the popular choice, was suddenly overthrown in a military coup. We don't yet know the details of what went on behind the scenes, but the timing? It's simply too good to ignore. A coup occurred 4 months after Alassane Ouattara returned to Ivory Coast and left the IMF. Could this be a coincidence? Maybe. Many sources, however, assert that France planned the coup and pulled strings once more to give their man the opportunity. But even with Bédié out of the way, there was still a problem. In the 2000 elections, Ouattara was still disqualified due to his Burkinabe roots. Then, who won? Laurent Gbagbo had been imprisoned by Ouattara years earlier. The roles were inverted. France was furious when Gbagbo came to power. And when France is angry, it doesn't act out. It fights a battle of the economy. Over the next decade, France used every instrument at its disposal to undermine Gbagbo. They did not merely criticize his presidency. They actively worked to destabilize it. They rallied allies of Ouattara in international institutions, such as the IMF, to put Ivory Coast in a difficult financial situation. The assistance was halted. Loans were halted. The debt restructure was weakened. The goal? Isolate Gbagbo to make him seem like a failure. But France did more than engage in economic warfare. Just 2 years into Gbagbo's rule, in 2002, the civil war began. And again, the pattern is impossible to miss. By arming Ouattara's allies in the northern regions, France is widely believed to have backed the rebellion. They weren't just outlaw fighters. They were there to sow discord and division throughout the country. Is that something you've heard before? Because this is more than just history. Right now, they are employing the same strategy. In Burkina Faso, destabilization, a puppet in the wings, and foreign hands hiding in the shadows. The question is, how often will Africa be caught in the same trap? The chaos that followed wasn't an accident. It was planned. Armed and well-trained, the northern rebels of Ouattara carried out deliberate acts of violence. The result? A brutal civil war tore Côte d'Ivoire in two. The northern region was taken over by Ouattara's troops. The legally elected president, Laurent Gbagbo, was nevertheless backed by the south. This was the perfect excuse for France to step in. Under the pretense of restoring peace, French troops were dispatched to aid their man in the north, but in reality, they served as power enforcers rather than peacekeepers. Nevertheless, the war raged on for nearly a decade. 10 years of destruction, slaughter, and horror. An entire generation brought up in conflict. An economy in ruins. A nation in ruin. Then, in November 2010, a presidential election was held in the midst of the destruction. The people were exhausted, and desperately in need of anything that even somewhat resembled hope. The final card for France was then played. They said that the savior was Alassane Ouattara, the man who caused the division and the violence. With international support and military aid from France, Ouattara launched a final onslaught. He led his army of insurgents across the country. They did not seek public office. They won. But it wasn't clean. For over 3 months, the nation was in flames. There was intense fighting between Gbagbo's army and Ouattara's French-backed rebels. As the death toll rose, Côte d'Ivoire's commercial hub, Abidjan, became a battlefield. Then the creepiest part started. As Ouattara's troops advanced on the presidential mansion, a trail of suffering was left in their wake. Thousands of civilians were slaughtered. One community alone saw the massacre of almost 1,000 people. Lives of innocent people. Had this been the guy France called a savior? A leader who became powerful by civil conflict, foreign armies, and mass murder? Freedom was not this. It was a hostile takeover that was disguised as democracy. He is currently doing the same to Burkina Faso. The country, the playbook, the puppet, and the master are all the same. Despite all the bloodshed, Laurent Gbagbo did not suffer a simple death. He and loyal Ivorian warriors held their stand. What did Ouattara do when the opposition was too strong? He got in touch with his old friend and current French president, Nicolas Sarkozy. The final act was suddenly underway. Sarkozy ordered French elite forces to support Ouattara within a command center he converted from a luxury hotel in Abidjan on April 3rd. Then, without the Ivorian people's consent, Sarkozy sent 1,500 French soldiers to Gbagbo's residence. Instead of only encircling it, they demolished it altogether. The helicopter strikes, rockets launched from tanks. The presidential residence was reduced to ruins. In 2011, Alassane Ouattara, a French puppet, was formally anointed king following the eventual capture of Gbagbo. Moreover, since then, Ivorians have never had absolute control over Ivory Coast. France has been slyly and covertly tugging threads behind the scenes. Burkina Faso is currently seeing the same tendency. Just think about it. Traoré is not your typical boss. He represents France's worst fear. An unapologetic, fearless anti-imperialist with a similar background to Thomas Sankara. He's bold enough to turn down France. He has uncovered their deception. The worst aspect is that he has changed the trajectory of African history by inciting a revolution in the Sahel. Traoré and the military rulers of Niger and Mali have caused France to lose power. No more uranium from Niger. France is furious. So what do? They go back to what they know the best. Both destabilization and puppetry. Conspiracy to kill Traoré. The rebels. The secure haven of Ivory Coast. The playbook remains unchanged. Create chaos. Fund insiders. Protect the traitors. And when the moment is right, substitute a puppet for the revolutionary. But this time, the world is watching. Africa is watching. Furthermore, the question of what France is doing has been resolved. Will Africa let the past happen again? The real question is that. Or will the cycle finally be broken? What better tool could France employ to remove Traoré and regain control of Burkina Faso than their own puppet, the President of Ivory Coast? President Traoré has been warning for months that Ivory Coast and France are working together to destabilize Burkina Faso. But many people did not believe him. They thought it was just political rhetoric. Now, the fact is undeniable. Ivory Coast is now home to the traitors who plotted Traoré's murder. Why? Because that's where the entire scheme started. That's where the orders came from. This section provides considerably more clarification. President Ouattara, who was born in Burkina Faso, is France's loyal defender. In fact, Ouattara and Burkina Faso are directly related. He has family there, long-lasting partnerships, networks. When France approved dealing with Traoré and recovering authority, who better to start the task than someone with one foot in Burkina Faso and one in Côte d'Ivoire? That's what we believe happened. That is beginning to be supported by the evidence. A puppet of a president, a boss from abroad, and a covert attempt to stifle one of the few anti-imperialist voices in Africa. But this time, the plan is exposed. Furthermore, awakening is happening not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent. In addition to offering asylum to the traitors who were targeting Burkina Faso, President Ouattara of Ivory Coast, who had the political and financial backing of France, also set up an operations center for them. They were given governmental protection, access to Ivorian wealth, and the chance to devise a detailed plan to topple President Traoré and destabilize the entire nation. But then, something unexpected happened. The strategy failed. These traitors have now promptly returned to their operational base in Abidjan, where they are sheltering in plain sight, under Ouattara's protection. Furthermore, Ivory Coast has recently targeted Traoré. The Ivorian press has published unfavorable pieces about Traoré. It has been said that he is a dictator. They have attempted to harm his reputation by accusing him of being incompetent. A charge of genocide has been brought against him. The fact that Ivory Coast has participated in prior coup attempts against Traoré may also be of interest to you. According to reports, Ouattara and France have plotted at least 3 coup attempts in neighboring Burkina Faso to remove President Traoré. Ouattara reportedly gave French funds to dissident Burkina Faso army personnel in an attempt to topple President Traoré. And for the same reason, President Ibrahim Traoré issued a bold warning last year in front of thousands of people at the Palais des Sports in Ouagadougou, which many initially ignored but is now proving to be tragically correct. Traoré spoke without holding back. He revealed that the true adversary is not only terrorists, but also imperialists who create division and hide in the shadows. He said that France was taking from Burkina Faso in an attempt to destabilize not only his nation, but the whole West African region. We have nothing against the Ivorian people, but we have something against whoever governs Ivory Coast, Traoré said categorically. He made public a controversial claim at the time, that in order to destabilize Burkina Faso, there is an operations center in Abidjan with French finance and assistance from Benin and Ivory Coast. Take a look at it now that the traitors have gone straight to Abidjan. At the time, many called it paranoia. The precise blueprint Traoré articulated, the identical metropolis he warned about, has been progressively realized. This brings us to the awful reality. What kind of Africa are we living in, wherein one country works with foreign powers to destroy another? We often say we want to be one, but how can we do that when betrayal has become a commodity? When leaders like Ouattara are willing to sell out their neighbors in order to acquire power, that is the core of Africa's predicament. Despite claims of sovereignty along our borders, our actions often reveal that we are weak, dispersed, and vulnerable to manipulation. When will we know? As long as traitors inside our ranks and Africans like Ouattara are willing to desert their people for their personal gain, we will remain caught in the same cycle of foreign rule, internal strife, and stolen futures. But things can change. Change will happen the day Africans stand up, not only to protest, but in principle. The day we prioritize loyalty over bribes, unity over betrayal, and patriotism above bribery. Africa can only begin to heal after that. Until then, leaders like Traoré won't be by alone. Ivory Coast's role in this assassination plot raises serious questions. Why protect traitors? Why stay silent while another African nation faces threats from within and without? But now that you know, the choice is yours. Will we continue to look the other way, or will we start holding leaders, both foreign and local, accountable? If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, so more people hear the truth. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you.